Hi everyone. So today we are going to be talking about all the new immigration changes. There is a lot of them. So we want to go over all of them. If you have questions, put them in the comments. There's a lot to get through. There are so many executive orders in 1 week. So many executive orders in 1 week. So we want to kind of go over that. I'll be doing a more detailed video on just all the executive orders that came out because again, there's so many of them and I want to really take my time and break down each of them in as much detail as possible. So just know that video is going to be coming up where we break down all the executive orders, just the executive orders. But in this video, we're going to talk about immigration as a whole, all the changes that we're seeing, and what you can be doing. Remember, as always, you can ask me questions if you are watching live. Put your questions in the comments. If you are watching this on a replay and you have questions, put them in the comments because I do go back and respond to as many questions as I possibly can while running a law firm at the same time. So just know you can ask me questions. Please do. And I'm just going to get through some of the changes and then I'm going to get to your questions. So stick with me. All right. Feel free to say hi and let me know where you're joining me from. And yeah, let's jump right in. So the first thing that happened is the CBP One app, which allowed people that want to seek asylum in the US to be able to basically make an appointment with CBP, Customs and Border Patrol. And on the day of the appointment, they can present themselves, have a quick, credible, fair interview to see if they are truly afraid to be in their country, if they truly have a claim for asylum. And if they do, then CBP will allow them to enter the US. That's what the app was made for. This dropped the amount of people entering through the southern border a lot during the Biden administration, but it is gone now. Okay. CBP One is no longer a thing. People that had appointments already scheduled on the CBP One are not, have all those appointments canceled. So if you are waiting, unfortunately, if you're waiting in Mexico thinking you're going to have your CBP appointment, it's no longer a thing. The Remain in Mexico, the MPP, is back in effect. So anyone that wants to enter the US and seek asylum basically is stuck in Mexico right now because they're not able to get an appointment. That whole process is now over and done with. And we're going to go back to calling undocumented immigrants aliens because, you know, that's that's what it is, right? So that is another thing that they did. And then on the same day, they did the executive order ending birthright citizenship for certain people. All right. So birthright citizenship, they're ending it for, they want to end it, right? So on that first day, they entered an executive order ending birthright citizenship for anyone that's undocumented and has a child in the US. Your child that you have in the US will not be a US citizen. And if you enter the US on a tourist visa or a temporary visa and you give birth in the US, even though you're in legal status, your child is also would not be considered a US citizen based on this executive order. So after the executive order went into effect and was signed, guess what happened? What I told y'all will happen is a lawsuit, right? I have a video where I break down like all the things that could happen and the actual implications and what would happen after that. So when he signed that into law, I already knew the lawsuit was coming. The ACLU was ready. They were ready. So they filed a lawsuit that is going on right now. The judge in that case has put a stay. So that means that executive order cannot be put into effect at this time. Now, that judge has clearly stated that birthright citizenship is a constitutional right. And the government has not shown that the president has the right to change a constitutional right with just a signature. Constitutional changes require Congress to pass a constitutional amendment. So that's what the judge said and put a hold on that executive order. So if you have a child in the US, your child is a US citizen, regardless of your status. That is still the law of the land. So that's the second thing that they did. And then we get to the crazier things. So ICE has no priorities. Under the Biden administration, they have priorities of who they will actively seek out for deportation. Okay. There were a list of individuals, well, a list of groups of people that if you fit into that group, you are a higher risk of being put in deportation proceedings, of them being deported. But that whole thing is out the window. There's no more actual people, groups of people, right? There's no more priorities. Everyone is a priority. And I remember doing a video where I talk about what they plan for their mass deportation and what that actually will look like in reality. And I remember a specific commenter said, oh, well, they're only going to go after people with criminal history. And if you've been in the US for over 20 years and have a family, you should be fine. Unfortunately, that is not the reality that we are seeing. Okay. That is not the reality. Everyone that is in the US and that is undocumented is being seen as a priority. Additionally, to make it a whole lot easier to do their mass deportation, like I said, they don't need that Alien Enemies Act. That was all just propaganda, in my opinion. That was just smoke and mirrors. Oh, we need this act to then do mass deportation. That's not true. What they need is expedited removal, like I said in that video. They don't need the Alien Enemies Act. They need to be able to remove people quickly without going through immigration court. And the only thing that gives that to them is expedited removal. So to make that happen, guess what they did next? They took away the Biden administration's policy, executive order, basically saying, no, not everywhere in the US is now, room for expedited removals. They limited where you can actually meet somebody, right? Where ICE can detain someone and be like, yes, you are subject to expedited removal. That went out the window. So the new policy one goes into effect immediately. And again, expands who is subject to expedited removal. So let me read this to you. Aliens, undocumented immigrants who did not arrive by sea, who are encountered anywhere in the US more than 100 air miles from a US international land border, and who have been continuously present in the US for less than 2 years. Okay? Anywhere in the United States, more than 100 air miles from a US international land border. And if you have been in the US for less than 2 years, you are subject to their expedited removal. So that's why, one of the things I said in the Know Your Rights and the preparedness video is that you want to make sure that you have documentation on you, whether it's your ID that shows that you have been physically present in the US for more than 2 years. Okay. Again, those two things have to be met before you'll be subject to expedited removal. So even if you're more than 100 air miles from a US international land border, but you have been in the US for 3 years, you will not be subject to expedited removal based on the way this is written. The next group of people that will be subject to expedited removal are aliens who did not arrive by sea, who are encountered within 100 air miles from a US international land border, and who have been continuously present in the US for at least 14 days but for less than 2 years. Again, that 2 years comes up again. So they're basically saying anywhere you are in the US, whether you're close to a land border or not, you're subject to expedited removal. If you are within 100 air miles of a US international land border, the requirement is that you have been present in the US for at least 14 days, but for less than 2 years. If you're outside of that 100 air miles, they just have to show that you've been in the US for less than 2 years. Okay. Super, super important. This makes, like I said, this makes everyone a priority. And that's why you need to make sure if you have been in the US for more than 2 years that you have your documentation able to show that. And if you watch my Know Your Rights video, you are allowed to have legal documents on you to be able to show ICE officers. However, you should maintain your right to remain silent. However, you do have a right to an attorney and to contact your attorney while you're going through this process. So it's so, so important that we know all of these things and know how to deal with it, right? So now we know wherever you are in the US, if you can show that you have been in the US for more than 2 years, you are not subject to expedited removal. That will slow down their expedited removal process and their mass deportation, mass detention process, right? There has been a lot of ICE activity. Some of them are real ICE activities, and then some of them are just fake news. Okay. I will be honest with you. There has been ICE activity, but not every single time that people say, oh, there was ICE over here at this grocery store. That does not mean that is true. Okay. We need to be very aware of the fake news that's out there and try to get our news from reliable sources. Okay. If you are in the public and you are documented, right? You're a US citizen, you're a permanent resident, and you see ICE in your community, please do not approach them. Okay. Do not approach them. You can record what you're seeing, right? You can make a note of when and where and how you knew they were ICE, because that's really important because people will say stuff and it's like, are you sure that that was ICE? And we do not know, right? So if you are out in your world and you do see ICE and you're able to verify that it's ICE, you want to document that. And the main thing you want to really document is how did you know that it was ICE? So that on our end, we can actually be able to verify, yes, it was ICE, and be able to advise people on things to look out for. Because sometimes they're in plain clothes, sometimes they actually have the jacket that has ICE written on it. So it's really important to keep that in mind. Not everyone that gets arrested or detained is being detained by ICE, but ICE activities are up. People are being detained, including US citizens. Okay. I have reliable sources that have said that they have seen US citizens be detained. And not just US citizens born in the US, just because they don't look like they should be US citizens. Okay. And you know what I mean by that, right? So it's really important that if you do see ICE and you're a US citizen or a permanent resident, that you are just making a note of you seeing them and how you knew they were ICE. Okay. Really, really important. Don't approach. If you are undocumented and you see ICE in public, as always, unless they are actually approaching you, you can try to get to safety. And if you are in a public place, they can enter a public place. Okay, that's really the problem. So if you go into a grocery store, technically they can go into a grocery store too. But if you are in a private home, then you have more rights. Okay, so really, really important that you know that. And then another executive action that they did was, yeah, it is getting really crazy out here. So they want to stop sanctuary cities, of course, and places that are typically exempt from ICE action. Okay. If you are, let's say, for example, you are in a school, right? A public school, technically it's a public school, it's a government building. However, it is typically protected and exempt from action from law enforcement. So law enforcement is not just going to barge into a school, and ICE is not typically supposed to just barge into a school and try to pick up people they deem to be undocumented. That's not how things were before, right? Churches, right? Typically, a church is a sanctuary place. You can go into a church and you will be protected, and they won't go into the church. That has been done away with executive action. So now, if ICE wants to go into a church, right? They know that there's a know your rights meeting at a church, a know your rights presentation, and they know that, okay, this is a church that may have some undocumented people. They can target that church, and they, with this executive order, will be able to enter, because now those churches are not protected anymore. Those schools are not protected anymore. So it is so important that you stay safe. I will tell you what I've been telling my clients is stay away from places that you know that a group of undocumented people are going to be at, right? So know your rights presentations, which we do, right? As part of a clinic at our public library, we do a know your rights presentation every single month. Now on our end, now that that has gone away, we are having conversations about, okay, should we take it virtual? Is there a way to make it to have it in a private space and not a public space? So it's a lot of conversations that are being had by organizations and groups that put on these know your rights presentations that try to help people, and making sure that in trying to help people and give them information that we on our end are not causing them to be targets. So it's a lot. It's a lot in 1 week that we need to basically reevaluate how we are providing pro bono legal services, and then how we're going to be protecting the people that want to come and, get assistance at our legal clinics without putting them in danger. Yeah, that is what we're doing on, and that's what every single organization, schools are trying to figure out. What is their legal um, obligations as far as, if ICE comes to the school, what is their legal obligations as far as cooperation, right? Do they have to actually cooperate with ICE, or can they go ahead and protect their students and the parents? So really, a lot of organizations, a lot of people are just trying to figure out the safest way to provide assistance without putting people in danger. And basically what this is causing right now, right, is fear and panic. If you have not noticed, that's really all this discourse on ICE doing all of this is doing. It's causing people to panic. It's causing people to be afraid to even leave their house, right? What typically happens in these situations is people are going to have to choose between, okay, do I take my child to school if I'm afraid that ICE may be there at the pickup and drop off, right? Should I take my child to their medical appointments? Should I even leave my house? Should I go to church? Those things that people usually are not thinking about are now in the forefront for a lot of undocumented people. So that's really the goal with all of these executive orders, with all of these like public ICE detentions, is because they want to sow that fear in people. So, and I can tell you it is working, because I get panic calls all the time. This week has been one hell of a week. Okay. So just know that is their goal, is to make it as hard as possible for you to live your day-to-day life without being afraid. Okay. So next thing, I know that was a lot. So the next thing that they did with the executive order is end the parole, humanitarian parole for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. So if you applied for that, just know that that has gone away. And it has only gone away for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. If you're from Ukraine or you're from Afghanistan, your humanitarian parole is still in effect. This executive order does not affect that. I wonder why. So just know that if you did apply and you're waiting for a decision, you are not getting a decision because that program is now gone. Unfortunately, right? That program is now gone. So if you enter the US without parole, just know once that parole ends, you no longer have status. So between now and when your parole ends, you want to start looking at options for you to gain legal status. And that's what I've been telling people from day one. But right now, it is really, really important that you know that. So, like I said, a lot of executive orders came out. I'm gonna do a video just on the executive orders because there's so many. There's so many, and I really want to break them down for you all. But I see y'all have questions, so let me answer some of your questions, and then we can get back to some of the other things that happen. All right. So under second Trump term, if I have a late registered birth certificate and no secondary evidence when applying for an IR2 visa, what will be my fate and what's the concern of the visa officer? So it's going, again, the concern is still the same. You need some form of secondary evidence. They may request a DNA test. So if you have a late registered birth certificate and your filing is based on a parent-child relationship, and that birth certificate is registered late, typically they will just ask for a DNA test to prove the relationship. So that would be the secondary evidence that the embassy may request. But that typically would not be like, that wouldn't change, right? Under the Biden administration, that would still be the same result. They need that secondary evidence. They may choose to have that secondary evidence or a DNA test. In this case, it will be easy enough to do a DNA test because it's a parent-child. It's based on a parent-child relationship, so you're able to prove that relationship right there. Okay. Is it safe to continue the consular process in I-601A? So right now, there has been no executive order stopping the I-601A. If you have already applied for the I-601A and you're now on the consular processing end, it depends on when your interview is, right? If your interview is in the next couple of weeks, I will just take a breath, right? Because it's just, we don't know. And, you know, one thing I will always tell you all is what I know and what I don't know. So we don't know what effect that may have on the 601A waiver process, but there has been no executive order or talks that we have heard that that program or that whole process would be affected. The only thing that may affect it is dependent on the country that you need to consular process in. That's really where I am more concerned. Is if it's a, so one of the executive orders is for basically directing the head of the Homeland Security to decide if there's countries that their vetting process is not on par with what the US wants it to be. This is the same thing that happened when they did the Muslim ban, where they banned certain countries from getting a visa to the US. So depending on what happens with that and what countries they put on that list, right? Depending on what happens with that, if you're from one of those countries, then consular processing would not really be an option that I would suggest, because you may not be able to come back if you're out of the country when that ban goes into effect. Of course, there's going to be litigation, there's going to be a lot of stuff, but the last time around, they did let him do it. So that's what I would be more concerned about, and not the process itself. It's just the country. Okay. So it's going to really depend on the country, and if that country is on any banned list. If I have an old crime that was waived through an I-601 waiver and adjusted to LPR, is it safe to travel? So typically, if you have that crime waived, it would no longer have an immigration effect. What I am telling everyone is, if you qualify for citizenship, apply for citizenship, okay? And also think about where you're going and what the relationship with the US and that country is, because we don't know, again, we don't know the effect travel will have, because again, all these executive orders are trickling in. We were hit with a lot this week, and we probably will get more every single week, which is what happened with the last Trump administration, is that we got like almost every single Friday a new executive order that just like ruined all immigration lawyers' weekends. Okay. So we don't know what that's going to look like. However, if you're a permanent resident, typically you are not a target, especially if the crime has been waived, right? If it's a new crime that that was committed while you were a permanent resident, I would be more concerned, but that's typically how that goes. All right. What's the status of the discretionary petition, which was implemented by Biden? I applied months ago, and ICE responded that my application was under review. So if you're talking about the parole in place, that is gone. A judge did away with that last month, if not November, but a judge did away with that last year in 2024. So that is no longer in place. It wasn't in place under the Biden administration, at the end of the Biden administration, and it's definitely not going to be in place with the Trump administration. So that is gone, unfortunately. Okay. I had a DNA test done during USCIS processing, as I didn't have any because of a late register, as I didn't have any secondary evidence. So I need another DNA test. Well, the same things that USCIS needs to prove the relationship is the same thing the embassy is going to need. So if you already did the DNA test, you typically have to go to the US embassy to do the DNA test anyway. So it's all in the same file. So once the relationship is established by USCIS, unless they have other evidence to show that the relationship is not what it said it was, they wouldn't require another DNA test. So the relationship is already established. So the late registered birth certificate would not be an issue. Okay. We know that we have the right to remain silent, but in a situation with ICE, is it okay to show documents to prove more than 2 years and that you are currently into an immigration process? Then simply remain in silence about any other questions. Okay. I am confused. Since you have the right to remain silent, I think that the moment you show them documents, you will basically break that right. No, showing a document does not break your right to remain silent, right? Answering questions, right? Answering questions does. By showing a document, so sometimes we have the card that has like the rights written on them. Showing that card to an officer does not break your right to remain silent, right? Showing that you are already in immigration court proceedings, they typically can take that, look it up, make sure, confirm that you're in immigration court proceedings and leave you alone, right? Or not put you in expedited removal. So yes, remain silent. Don't answer questions. Don't answer questions, especially about where you're from, how long you've been in the US. If you have the documentation, show the documentation, but remain silent. Okay. It is hard. I know it's hard. I know for me, it's hard to just remain silent and not try to explain myself. Um, because sometimes you think that if you try to explain yourself, then people are going to behave differently. Just remember, anything you say will, not even can and will, no, will be used against you. It will be used to determine where you're from, how long you've been here, all of those things. And sometimes I hate to say it, but ICE makes mistakes, and people that should not be expedited removed through the expedited removal process are removed through the expedited removal process because they don't have that proof. So that's why I say have your documentation with you, please. Okay, at the very least, have that documentation with you because it can make a huge difference. As scary as it is, it can make a huge difference. Okay. I learned during the last Trump term, Nigeria was banned to as an IR2 visa applicant. Will that prevent me from traveling? Will it affect the visa process? It's going to depend on if Nigeria is put on a travel ban list. I don't know if Nigeria is going to be put on a travel ban list. Typically, there is exceptions on who is banned, right? So even though a country is put on a travel ban list, there may be exceptions for minor children of U.S. citizens that are going through immigration process or spouses of U.S. citizens. So it's going to depend on how it is worded. At this point, we have not seen a ban. Okay, we have not seen the language, so I cannot answer that question for you until if right until something happens where we actually have a list of a ban of the banned countries and the terms of the ban, then I can confidently say, yes, this country is banned, and these are the people that can and cannot get immigrant visas to the US from these countries, right? Like I said, there are typically exceptions built in. In the last term, there was exceptions built in for immediate relatives of US citizens, especially spouses and minor children of US citizens. But again, without actually seeing it, I don't know if it would affect any one specific process or if Nigeria would be on a list of banned countries. Okay. Question. Am I still considered undocumented if I have a valid EAD card based on a pending I-485 and a pending VAWA? Unfortunately, yes. So you have an immigration process pending. Until that process is approved, you are still in the same status that you were before you filed the applications. Okay, so you would still be considered as someone that does not have legal status in the US. You do have the right to work in the US. It's the right to live in the US. That's the issue when it comes to the status. Okay. Those are all the questions I see so far. Remember, go go ahead and ask me your questions if you have any. All right. So just a quick recap. The CBP One program is now gone. Anyone that had an appointment scheduled got a notification that their appointment is canceled. The Birthright citizenship executive order ending birthright citizenship for children of undocumented immigrants and children of temporary visitors to the US that came on like a visiting visa. That was it's a whole mess. So it was filed, the executive order was filed, they were sued, the judge stayed the whole thing, so they can't implement that executive order. So if you're in the US and you have a child today, tomorrow, your child is a US citizen. Okay. So that is not in effect. And like I said in my previous video, that is going to be a fight because it is a constitutional right. And typically, if you want to change a constitutional right, you have to get a constitutional amendment. So an executive order is not the way to go, but he said he will try and see what happens. So now he is seeing what happens. The judge is not going for it. ICE is now able to go into churches, schools, libraries, for the most part, and to do their enforcement activities. Before, those places were considered safe and protected. The executive order basically took away the protection, making it possible for ICE and law enforcement to go into those places. Eternal love, yes, it is temporarily blocked by the lower court judge, which, based on the oral arguments and the questioning from that federal judge, they are not going to grant. They're not going to rule in favor of the government, which means there's going to be an appeal. The appeal can go to the appeals court before the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court can choose to take it on right away without having to go through the appeals court process. So all of this is still ongoing and still developing. So what I'm trying to say, however, is if you're having a child in the US today, until that block is lifted, right? Until that state is lifted, your child is a US citizen. It could change if it gets to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court decides to let a president change a constitutional amendment, change a constitutional right without going through Congress, without going through the proper channels that's set up to basically stop a president from being able to do this. So we will see what happens. However, at this moment, it is blocked. Okay? If that changes, of course, I'll bring that to you. So as far as ICE enforcement, they are actively seeking to detain and remove people. The people that are being removed, I know there's a lot of discourse out there. There's a lot of people talking about, oh, they just, everyone they pick up, they are removing. That's not true. Typically, the people they're able to remove with that speed are people that already have a removal order, and they can only remove them to countries where they already have an agreement with that country, that the country is willing to take back their citizens that are deported from the US, right? So Mexico is one of those countries that if you are being deported back to Mexico and you are from Mexico originally, Mexico is actually taking steps to help their citizens that are being deported back to Mexico to adjust and get to where they need to be and make sure they're taken care of as they enter Mexico. However, those are people that either already have a removal order or are subject to expedited removal. Okay. I'm not sure if you're, I don't know what that means, Craig. So, all right. So, yes, I will get into that. That's the big one. That's the big one. So, that has not, so that has passed Congress. So, we're waiting for that to be signed. So, just going to put it up here so people can see what you're asking about. So, that specific act makes a lot of people subject to mandatory detention. So typically, if you are charged with a crime, there's certain crimes that if you're charged with, arrested for, convicted of, will make you subject to mandatory detention, meaning that the US government can try to deport you, and while they're going through the court process to deport you, you will be in detention the whole time. right? You cannot be bonded out. There's certain other people that can be bonded out, but you will not be able to. And with this act that has passed Congress, with 12 Democrats signing onto it, I'm sorry, I digress. So with that, it's going to open up a lot more people to mandatory detention, including someone that shoplifts, right? And it does not, so when it says shoplift, it does not say an amount over this, right? So sometimes there's misdemeanor, and then there's felony, depending on how much the things that the person stole cost. In this act, they're saying even if it's just a minor shoplifting incident that you are charged for, if you are undocumented and you get arrested for that, ICE can detain you and you will not be able to get bond. You will be subject to mandatory detention and you will then have to go through immigration court proceedings. And if you win in court, then you'll be released. And then if you don't win, you will be subject to deportation and they will do everything in their power to get you deported. So, yes. Okay. So that is the act. And okay, Greg, let's talk about that. So there's still laws, and I'm guessing you missed the part where I talked about the expedited removal process and the expansion of that. So if someone is in the U.S. for more than 2 years, they can now go through the expedited removal process. They have to go through immigration court proceedings. So whether they're undocumented, right? Whether you think they should be deported ASAP or not, there is still legal procedures that they need to go through. If they are not subject to expedited removal, they do not just get deported. They have to go through immigration court proceedings, and they may qualify for asylum. They may qualify for cancellation of removal. They may qualify for withholding of removal. So there's certain things that people can qualify for in immigration court to avoid being deported, but you are allowed to have your opinions, but the law has not changed on that part, okay? So not everyone gets to be deported as much as you would want that. All right. Next question. I am 20 years old now and I'm in the immediate relative category. If I turn 21 or older before MVC or consular processing, do I still qualify for an IR2? Typically for immediate relatives of US citizens, especially children, their age is locked in when they file the I-130, right? So the age is typically locked in as long as you go ahead and pursue your consular processing within a year of you qualifying to pursue your consular processing. The age is locked in from the time it was filed, not the time it was processed. So even if a child is 20 when the I-130 is filed, there is protections in place for that child. So even if they're over 21 when the visa becomes available or when they have their interview, that does not change the fact that they qualified as an immediate relative of a US citizen. Okay. Let me see if I see any other questions. So I don't see any other questions. Please feel free to ask me questions if you're watching this on a replay and you have questions, please go ahead and put it in the comments. Okay. Craig, I'm sorry. That's not what this is all about. But I don't know the answer to that. Feel free to do your research and get the answer to that. And just so people are clear, because I don't like ignoring comments, even when they are so freaking off topic. But let's talk about it. If someone is undocumented in the US, they are not just getting any government assistance. So let's let's get that clear. All right. They do not qualify for government assistance. They do not qualify for anything. So it's really important to keep that in mind as well. Most of them work, most of them pay taxes. They are not living off the government because they cannot live off the government. So I know people like to pin when we're having conversations about undocumented immigrants, we do the what about, right? What about these other people? What about, you know, these people over here? Well, we can worry about homelessness, people being unemployed, and undocumented immigrants all at the same time. We don't have to choose, right? We can choose to be concerned about all of those things. You just happen to be in an immigration channel on YouTube. So, what I talk about here is US immigration. So, that's why what we are all talking about is US immigration. We are not talking about homelessness or the unemployment rate because I am not qualified to talk about those things because that is not my focus. So there are channels here on YouTube that really focus on that. And you should probably, um, you know, go over there and talk to them about it because I don't have answers for you. Okay, I can't answer immigration questions. Why they don't fight in their own homeland? Bring that up, beautiful Black sister. Thank you, thank you. First off, some of these people are in the U.S. because they have been threatened, they have been assaulted. If they went back to their home country, they would be killed. Right? So they may not be able to go and fight for their own home country because if they step foot in their home country, they could be killed. There's that too, right? So when we're talking about immigrants, let's not, you know, assume that people are just here because, they don't want to be in their home country. They're here because they do not have a choice. Some of them are here because they don't have a choice. So let's not group everyone together when we say that. And also, I always have to bring this up because I do not want it to be lost on anybody, right? I am an immigrant. Yes, I'm a US citizen now, but I am an immigrant. I was not born in the US. So I always want to bring that up, not to say, oh yeah, I'm a US citizen, but to make it clear that when I talk about immigration, when I talk about immigrants, I am talking from experience. I am talking from a place of passion and compassion. So let's just make that very clear. All right. Is it safe to travel when you have 10 years green card and have a dismissed shoplifting case and there is a pending naturalization application? So if your case is dismissed, right, that means there's no conviction. Typically, that would not affect your green card. All right. So just keep that in mind. All right. When you file for your child immigration case, and the case is in MVC now, when did you think to do the DNA test for the child, or the embassy will let you know when the time comes? Yes. So for the DNA test, the embassy has to initiate it. So if USCIS did not ask you for a DNA test, the embassy will just schedule you for an interview. If they feel there's a need for a DNA test, at that interview, they will let you know and give you the process to do the DNA test. So even if your case is still with USCIS, you do not do any DNA test on your own unless they require it. Because if you go and do it on your own, you probably are not going to follow the right procedure that they want you to do because they have specific places that you can do the DNA test. So you have to wait for them to actually go ahead and do and request that DNA test. Sometimes they don't, right? Sometimes they don't request the DNA test if they see enough in there to show the relationship. So don't assume that you're going to have to do a DNA test. All right. Next, Sam, thank you. Yep, there is. There is. I'm just gonna, yeah, there is. And, you know, what I am gonna do on my channel is speak the truth, right? I always tell you all that. When you come here, you're gonna get the truth. I'm not gonna sugarcoat things. I'm not going to, make you feel good about US immigration when it doesn't feel good, right? This week has been just a whiplash of executive orders, a whiplash of ICE enforcement that just does not make sense based on what they said on the campaign trails and what people have been in my comments telling me who they're supposed to be focusing on. That has not been really the case. And the fact that now schools, churches have to worry about all of these things is insane. Now you have to worry about, as you're preaching as the pastor, you have to worry about, is this the day ICE is going to come into my church, right? Do I have to now go virtual so that my congregation that may be undocumented are able to still attend without physically leaving their home? That's conversations that people are having. Okay. So, and yes, Esther, it is scary. But I want to give you the information, right? Because the more you know, the more you're able to protect yourself, the more you're aware of your surroundings as well. So if you have not watched the family preparedness video that I put out on Tuesday, please watch it. Have a plan in place. Like most people are not going to be picked up by ICE. Okay, most people are not. But if you end up in that situation, you want to have a plan. You want to have a plan in place. Who's going to take care of your kids? How they're going to get to school? Is the person going to have legal rights to make decisions for them if you are detained? You want to make sure you're doing all of those things because you never know what's going to happen. So it's really, really important. Craig, you're still in here. How do you feel about illegal immigration since you is a citizen now? I feel blessed. This is how I'll answer this question. I feel blessed that I was able to come to the US based on a petition filed by my father. That's how I feel about undocumented immigrants in the US. I feel blessed that I did not have to go through what they are going through, the dehumanization that they are going through. I feel blessed that I don't have to do that. And I feel privileged that I am in a position where I get to help people, right? I get to help someone go from undocumented to eventually becoming a US citizen. And I have seen that progress in my almost 10 years of being an immigration lawyer. So that's how I feel about it. Okay. What will be status of babies whose parents are asylees? If the child is born in the US, the child is a US citizen. Okay. The executive order ending birthright citizenship, the judge blocked that. So it is not in effect. So if the child is born in the US, unless the Supreme Court or an appeals court does something else, the child is a US citizen. Unless there's a constitutional amendment tomorrow by Congress, the child is a US citizen. Okay? Okay. So to the question about traveling with a dismissed shoplifting case, I would need to see the documentation. So I can only answer general questions. Generally, if it's a actually dismissed and it does not count as a conviction is typically not a problem, right? So I'll give you an example. In Massachusetts, we have, so if someone is charged with a crime, there's something called guilty filed. That is not considered a conviction for immigration purposes. But we also have a continuance without a finding, right? For a US citizen that gets a continuance without a finding, it is amazing, right? Because it's not a conviction for a US citizen. But for someone that maybe that's not a US citizen, right? Or maybe undocumented, a continuance without a finding is a conviction for immigration purposes. So that's why it's really important to not just look at the basics, but we kind of have to look deeper and look at the actual disposition. So yeah, so typically if it's outright dismissed, then there's no conviction, right? So being charged with a crime is not, and so there's a difference between being charged with a crime and the case is still ongoing, so there's no final disposition. And then there's someone that already was charged with a crime. They went through court, the case is dismissed, it's closed, it's final. Those are two different situations. So if you have an open case and you're just charged with a crime, you have not been convicted, you're still open to the mandatory detention if that act is signed by the president, which it most likely will be signed. But if you are already went through the court process, there is no conviction. Then there's no conviction, right? You would not be subject to that mandatory detention. So that's why it's really important to know the difference, right? When your case is over, it's about how it ended. If your case is still pending, you are open to issues, basically, right? How much evidence should one have to commence adjustment of status? It depends, right? It depends on your relationship. I always tell people it depends on how long you've been married, right? If you have been married for a year, I expect you to have a lot of documentation, right? If you've only been married for a month, I don't expect you to have a lot of documentation together. I do expect you to have something, right? Pictures, messages back and forth. If you are on social media, are you posting each other, right? Those type of things. That's what I would expect for a marriage that's like less than 6 months old. The more you're in the marriage, the more I expect out of your documentation. So there's no like threshold of you need this much documentation before you can start your green card process. What I do want you to know is as your green card process is going on, you should be still gathering those documentation because it doesn't just end, right? So if you are, 1 year into your marriage, you file your green card application, your green card interview may not be for another year. When you get to your green card interview, you better have documentation for that year of your life together, right? You better have documentation. So it's not about, how much evidence you have at the initial step. You just need to know that you are expected to have more documentation the longer your case takes to be approved, right? The longer it takes you to get to the interview, they expect you to start building that documentation as a married couple, especially once you get a work permit and your social. Now you don't have an excuse of why you don't have a joint account, why your name is not on the bills, why this, like, there's less excuses. So you just want to make sure that you are building those. But at the initial start, there's no threshold. I just need you to have something, right? I just need you to have something. That's what it really is. So make sure you have something. Craig. Okay. I'm not trying to make you mad. I'm just asking you a question, no disrespect. Oh, I'm not mad. So sometimes my passion may come out as mad, but I'm not mad. Okay. And that's so here's the thing. If I was mad, I would have blocked you. I have the power to stop you from commenting, but we're having a conversation here. And sometimes I do get passionate, but I am not mad because I rather address your question and let other people, hear the answers to it than not. So absolutely none taken, not mad. All right. Like I said, always happy to answer questions. It may not be the question I was prepared to be answering today, but it is important to answer those questions because it affects the people that are watching, and they may have the same questions and are not willing to ask the questions. So, um, not mad at all. All right. So, if you have any additional questions, feel free to put them in the comments. I do not see any new questions. I hope I answered your questions. I hope you kind of got an overview of the new things happening in immigration. Like I said, I'll be doing a video for Tuesday where I will be breaking down all the executive orders that relate to immigration because, again, it's an immigration channel. There are other executive orders that came out that are not immigration related, but I will just cover the ones on immigration, or I will have a 2-hour video instead of like a 30-minute video. So that's what we're going to do on Tuesday. And then next week, Friday, we're going to have another live where we break down. Hopefully, there's not a lot of craziness that happens between now and next week, Friday, when we have our next live. But if there is, we'll cover all of it. And make sure you bring your questions because that is so important. All right. So I saw a couple questions come in, so we're still here. Is written warning a citation on N445 old ceremony? It depends on what the warning was for, right? It depends on what it was. But I would err on the side of bringing the bringing a copy of it to the old ceremony and asking the officer, right? If you have a lawyer, you want to share that documentation with them so that they can analyze it. If you are not represented, you may want to just have the documentation. So, but it all comes down to what is the warning. A citation usually has like a consequence to it, right? A citation has a consequence. Uh, so like a speeding ticket is a citation, right? A warning is a warning, right? Don't do this again. It's not really a citation. A citation usually has a consequence to it. But to be on the safest of all safe sides, especially with this administration, you can bring that with you, right? But it should not stop you from being sworn in, okay? Typically, moving violations are not a problem. Not stop sign. If you have a speeding ticket, right, for example, and it is not above a certain amount, I believe it's like 300 now. You don't even have to put it on the thing, like on the application. So I wouldn't see that as. But you want to, if you're working with a lawyer, you want to confirm that with your lawyer cannot give you legal advice, as always. Should someone just with just EAD from asylum application be afraid of deportation? So here's the thing with asylum. Asylum is kind of different from adjustment of status, right? Um, when it comes to asylum, once you file your asylum application, you usually get a receipt notice, and on that receipt notice, it tells you that you can legally that you can stay in the US until a decision is made on your asylum application. All right. So, but if you're filing like a green card application based on marriage, you are not getting the same thing. So asylum is very different. And if you have an EAD, depending on how long you've been in the US, if you have a pending asylum application, you are typically not going to just be removed from the US because you have a pending asylum application. It's not the EAD that's the thing that's keeping you from deportation, is the pending asylum application. You have a legal right to remain in the US until a final decision is made on that asylum application. So not the EAD. The EAD does not give you any rights, but the pending asylum application does. Right? It gives you um, the ability to remain in the US until that final decision is made on your asylum application. Mhm. All right. All right. So if you are still here and you have not liked this video, please go ahead and like it because it truly does help other people see this. And I truly do appreciate your questions. So that is it for today. I do have a client knocking on my door to pick up their green card. So I will see y'all some other time. Thank you so much for joining me as always. And I will be back here next week, Friday. Remember to like this video, share this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye, y'all.